Hey everyone, hope you guys are having a good day, a great week. Welcome to a Whiskey Wednesday here on Midnight Hatter Live. I am, of course, your host, Steven, and joining me as always is the mighty Adam Blue. How are you doing, buddy?
Doing good. Again, always glad to do this middle of the week. It kind of washes away the Monday and Tuesday. You know what I mean?
Yeah, washes away is a good way of putting it, considering how the weather is outside here. I know you're in the middle of a heat wave, but over here on the East Coast, I am practically drowning. So
Oh man, yeah. Hopefully some of that comes over here, even though I don't think that's the direction it works. But yeah, you
no,
know what
no.
I mean.
But yes, this is the weekly variety show where we talk tabletop, video game dev, and all things Gundam. And before we get into, our topics for the evening, what's up, Robert, in the chat? I see you, and of course, Gundam Explain, Adam. Thank you for participating in the chat as well. You're
Oh
playing
yeah.
double duty over here. Um, I just want to shout out myself here on this one. The Midnight Hatter merch store has been updated again. If you guys haven't visited it lately, you can visit us at shop.1000lines.com. You can get neat shirts branded with my new logo like these, or you can get, something like a colony
Mm,
drop sticker, which I think is pretty cool. Let everyone know who you're voting for. um, or, you can support either the Federation or Xeon. I need to get myself one of those based in Xeon build
yeah.
shirts because that's um pretty sweet looking.
I like that Fetty and Proud. That I don't know what it is. That's a good design.
Yeah,
Some that
basic,
basic. Yeah.
basic and to the
Yeah.
point.
I know.
Just let everyone know where you stand. Um, but yeah, we've got a fun little show planned for you. Got some cool things that I want to share before we hop into tonight's video game topic. As you might have seen in the thumbnail, we're going to be talking about random number generation, RNG for short, and probability using random generation in video game design, and whether you can kind of emulate the sort of tabletop mechanics that you see in board games or tabletop role playing games in a video game effectively. There are some examples I think that you and I have talked about privately that kind of pull it off well, and I think we're going to dive a little bit deeper into those subjects tonight. Um, but before we get on to that, I want to share with you a couple of prototypes that I have going here. Uh, so if you've been following the channel, if you've been following my work for a while, you know that I'm something of a problem solver. I a little bit of a mad scientist. I like to try and solve Gunpla problems and hobby problems, and video game problems. I like to experiment and see what kind of creative outcomes we can get. So one of the things I've been working on was I've always struggled with the idea of water slide decals. And Adam, you're kind of feeling my pain on this one recently getting into Gunpla over the last few weeks. You kind of gotten into decaling mobile suits as well, haven't you?
Yeah, in fact, it's like one of my favorite parts, yet it's one of the most frustrating, I think. But it's just the payoff, I think, balances it out. But yeah, there's
Yeah.
frustration to the whole process.
I mean, most model kits come with stickers, but obviously
Yeah,
the king of the road is the water slide
water slide.
decals,
Yep.
which are fantastic. Like I would never, you know, not gonna poo poo on water slide decals. They hold up the best. They look the
Yeah.
best, and
Hmm.
but my problem has always been like I don't want to pay another $10 for another sheet of decals. Like, can I print them at home? There is water slide decal paper out there. Unfortunately for a lot of people, unless you have an Alps printer or you have a printer that's compatible with Ghost white ink cartridges, you're gonna have a hard time printing out decals that will appear on dark colored mobile suits. In the past, I've also experimented with, these are kind of like homemade rub-on decals, and like I said,
Oh,
if you've
wow.
followed my work in the past, you know that I made a video previously where I took a technique that I saw on the Craftman YouTube channel, Steady Craftin' with the Craftsman.
Huh.
Um, he does a technique where he uses a laser jet printer, and he prints on what's basically label paper, but he prints it on like the slick side of label paper. Like you throw away the labels and you just print on the sort of the greasy side where the sticker was.
Yeah.
And once you apply a bit of glue to your kit, you can basically just rub the paper on and it leaves a decal behind.
Wow.
It's got some great results, honestly.
Is that what you did with that one?
Yeah, these were
With that
homemade laser printed
with the label paper on the sticky side?
exactly. Um
Wow.
and like I said, honestly, looks great. You got to be very delicate with them. They will, kind of chip and you'll lose ink sometimes if
And
you
it's
don't
like
top
that with
coat.
the dry transfers.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Like at first I liked that. In fact, at first I thought I'd like that more than water slides because I didn't have to like cut, dip, kind of make sure it's correct and fit. I
Yeah.
could just tape it where I wanted to and then rub. The thing is, more often than not, you would mess it up compared to a water slide. It could have
Oh
that
yeah.
chipping like you're talking about. Or you move something out of line, you're like, with the water slides, like yesterday, actually it's with this,
Oh God, I
put
love that
some
kit.
yeah, I put some water slides on it from an origin. And then like I was showing my wife, and then as I was looking at it, I was like, wait a minute, the sticker is missing from the knee. Where could it be? And then later it was in my fingernail. But I was still able to remove it, wet it, and put it on.
And then once you top coat it, it's fine. It's stuck on there. You don't have to worry about it.
Exactly.
So yeah, suffice to say, I've been working to solve this problem for years now. And I was drawn to these miniature Gundam fingers, these miniature Gundam figures, the
Yeah.
1/400th scale Gashapons, right? So
Oh
like,
yeah.
if you look
Those are the ones
closely,
you found like on eBay?
yes, you can get
Okay.
whole lots of these on eBay for not a terrible price, honestly. And these particular units, they have these sort of decals on them. They're not water slides. Making sure that my camera is actually
I
focusing on
saw it
these
on Oh,
guys.
there you go. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 56. Yeah, that's
What I found fascinating about these is there's no way that someone hand painted these, obviously.
okay.
But they are. It's almost like they're printed directly onto the figure, which I was fascinated by. And so, what I've got here are some early prototypes of stamp molds. These are the molds that I'm going to actually pour some silicone into to make some stamps. These, I also have stamps of, Xeon and Federation crests, which I think, you know, we can give one a little try here to see how they do. I 3D printed them, obviously, but
Yeah.
you know, a 3D print is going to be a little too rigid, a little too hard to actually stamp, especially on a curved surface. You might want to stamp onto, the curved surface of a Zaku shoulder, for instance.
Not only that, or like sometimes you see on a shield that has the curves or even the angles where they have like a cool decal that goes across it, like the Alex or something.
Exactly. So so the idea is if I were to box, a curved print off of these. But, I think that for all and purposes, yeah. I mean, obviously these prints are not ideal.
Yeah, it's kind of like having to test out like I saw in your video with painting the miniature how you were doing stuff to the paint to give it the right, I guess, what not texture but consistency.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So I mean, I'm for especially multiple sizes and scales and things like that. I'm gonna have to experiment and make sure that I get the best detail output. I'm gonna be limited by the 3D printer that I have. The tiniest mold box that I have is this guy, which is about 8 millimeters.
That is
Um,
amazing.
the detail on that is not where I want it to be. So I'm gonna have to experiment with like exposure
Oh.
times and things like that to make sure that I actually get enough of the logo so that when I stamp it, it'll, give me a clean print. But But
But that is awesome.
I think that it's for things that you're going to decal over and over again, like a Xeon logo or a
Yeah.
Federation logo. I think it makes more sense to have something like this, like a stamp that you can always and you can choose the color, right? Like,
Yeah, I honestly think that would be a game changer if somehow that was able to be, like you're one step closer to probably the ultimate way of having, yeah, a quick and easy. You have your stamp, choose your ink, do it, wash it real quick, do the other one. Because as it is right now, I have to, okay, cut out the multiple things,
yep,
put them in the water, kind of let it sit for a little bit, then take it out and then carefully, place it on, move it right where I want it, which I don't mind. That's actually a fun exercise. But
it is kind of
the
fun.
stamping makes sense. It reminds me, like you were saying, how they must have printed it on the figures. Like the newer Marvel Legends or Hasbro figures, they seem to have it where they are it's like a sort of a printing that they're doing, like the face printing, or sometimes some details that would be too hard to hand print. They'll actually just do some sort of mass print on it where sometimes you could see it's
It,
off a little bit, like when you see
yep,
the print, which is funny.
yeah.
Um,
And I mean that
but
has to
yeah.
be how they do it for like Lego minifigs, right?
Oh yeah.
Because those are
Yeah,
printed
that's right.
directly onto the plastic.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean you feel my pain, and I think that that's
Yeah.
this is gonna be just one more thing that I can contribute to the Gunpla world. Is like, hey, if you want a silicone stamp for a couple of different logos that that you're gonna reuse a lot. Obviously there are going to be limitations. You can only do one color at a time. It's kind of like screen printing. Like in that
Oh
regard,
yeah.
you couldn't do like a full color logo. For that, you'd still want to do water slides. But
Yeah.
I think it's pretty cool.
Yes.
Once I nail down the right technique and the right process, I will definitely be sharing that with you guys. Um, Back to the chat. I see Matt brought up tabletop video games. What, like the Resident Evil 2 board game or something? I was very excited about that Resident Evil 2 board game from Steamforged. I almost
Mhm.
backed it, almost purchased it, but I just couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to with that price tag.
Oh, is that what it was? That it was like I just
It's
the
like
price.
115
Yeah.
bucks.
Hmm.
And Steamforged is really good with their minis. But anybody who saw the sort of alpha release of that Dark Souls
Oh yeah.
RPG that they put out, apparently I've been told that the final release, the final version of that rule set has been greatly improved. But
Hmm.
in my experience, Steamforged makes amazing miniatures, but they're not really great at the game design.
That's interesting. And oh, by the way, what up, Zionic Shadow? See you in the chat. Good to see you.
Always good to see
So
you, bud.
there's that, because I have a thing for the MMPR Power Rangers because that was like,
Yes.
the first
Classic.
thing. Yeah, and there's a game of that out there, and the reason
Yes.
I wanted to get it is because they had miniatures, and then I wanted to paint them. They even had like a Megazord, and it was not completely to scale, but they kind of. But I would just keep hearing things about it. The game's just okay.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, if I'm going to spend that much on miniatures, I'd also want to enjoy the game. And if I'm not going to enjoy the game, should I pay just to have the miniatures? That's the same thought I had about the Dark Souls and Bloodborne,
Yeah.
or that might have been a different game.
I think they did do a Bloodborne as well.
Okay. Okay.
And I feel like that's 90% of the board game Kickstarters out there is they have these huge price tags attached to them, and a lot of that
Yeah.
just comes with the 3D printing of the miniatures that come with the game. And most people
Mm.
accept the price tag because they want the miniatures and they don't necessarily care about the
Yeah.
game. They're like, you
Yeah.
know what?
That's interesting.
I sank 150 bucks into it. If the game's great, then awesome. If the game sucks, then at least I've got $115 worth of miniatures.
Yeah, no, it's funny. It reminds me of, I forget where I was, Target or Walmart. They have these. There's all these different types for different age ranges, but they have these like little figures that come in a 2-pack, and they're on a plastic piece with the controller, or not a real controller, but like a sort of a switch or a button, and you make the two characters fight each other.
Oh, that's awesome.
And
It's like Rock'em
you can,
Sock'em Robots, but
yeah, it's like that, and it's supposed to be like a game, and I think that's an interesting way, I guess, for younger people to get into miniatures because these are aimed at kids like
they are.
under 10, but like
Yeah.
it's that same type of thing. It's a miniature. There's a game element, so not only collecting, but then there's something you can play.
Nice.
Oh, yeah.
Well, so Prairie Tan, welcome to the chat. Thanks for tuning in.
Uh-huh.
Has a question. I'm gonna pitch this one to you first, Adam, just in case you have an answer. Like I said, you're not much of a tabletop gamer, but
No.
what is your favorite tabletop skirmish game right now, if you have any?
Well, yeah, see, I don't, but I think the closest would be, I bet by skirmish it's like something that's more of action based than like a story. Is it
100%.
okay?
Yeah, yeah.
I would say, when because I did a story based one, it's something I've seen a lot but never partook in yet. I enjoy is Warhammer 40,000,
Yep.
and that seems to be more around the skirmish type thing. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Or is there?
there's two versions, I guess.
Okay.
There's the traditional Warhammer 40K, which is like kind of large scale armies, and then you have Kill Team, which is the sort of skirmish, like micro
Okay.
scale battles, which is a very
It,
cool thing. And you and I are going to talk about this, I think, later in our conversation
okay.
tonight, is talking about sort of micro battles versus macro wars, right?
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Then I'll save my comment about that for that part because it's related to Warhammer 40,000 and video games, and I've never played the tabletop or miniature game. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Um, I think that my favorite tabletop skirmish game, I think of all time, and this is gonna, probably offend some people, but I love the game Heroescape. It was a Hasbro game, I want to say, but
Yeah, I remember hearing about that. Never
I
played it.
loved the way that that game handled multiple types of units and elevation, and obviously, going to the subject of our later discussion about video games is the terrain actually would change every game. So instead of having a default map or anything like that, you had these hex-based tiles, and you could change whatever landscape you wanted to make and then play on that landscape. So, my brothers and I would probably spend like 6 hours building
Holy
a
moly.
map and then like 45 minutes actually playing the game.
That's actually pretty cool. That reminds me, when I was a kid playing action figures, me and my friends would set up the room for the action figures. Most of the time, we'd set it
Yes.
all up, and then we'd play, but then we'd stop.
Did you like put stuff under like a white sheet and call it like a snow mountain? It's
Exactly. Bookshelf would be like a building
Yep.
that we had to scale,
Recreate
or
the
the
Battle of Hoth like.
yes, yes, the white sheet. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's probably my go-to as far as miniature games go. And I wish that, they kind of wow.
Wow, I heard that.
That's crazy. I'm glad that that came through the microphone because that was nuts.
That was.
Well, for the record, this probably looks a little silly. It looks like I'm drinking milk. I'm not. This is actually a moonshine with strawberry cream mixed with it. So
Wow.
that's the whiskey of the night. I guess you might even call it a Red Russian, or since I've got Adam with me, it's a Red Comet.
Oh, there you go. That's good. That's
I
good.
got you. Um, So, let's see. It was nostalgia that led me to find the Gamma Wolves in Malifaux like 2 days ago. Yes. No, and I mean, honestly, I still use my Heroescape miniatures for D&D. The terrain is still awesome. In fact, I'm even debating using Heroescape as a platform for a Gundam skirmish game as opposed to the Gundam skirmish rules that are available online for free.
Hmm.
I think that that would be cool, especially because, one of the things about the Gundam Skirmish game that's out there, that's like a tabletop sort of, small scale. Hey, I've got 3 mobile suits, you've got 3 mobile suits, let's fight it
Uh,
out. I think that using the Heroescape rules, especially when it comes to unit rarity, would be amazing because then you'd basically have like a team of 3 Zaku's versus 1 Ground Gundam, or
hmm.
and then so you kind of get that sense of like you can outnumber other units, but with weaker units. So,
And not that I know much about Heroescape, but I do like this terrain thing and like building the terrain. Like that's a cool idea. And what's really neat is, oh, I forgot the name of the brand. They came out with a line recently of Halo Infinite figures that are like the 4 inch.
oh
They're like
yeah.
to scale. I have a whole ton of them, and actually, I don't even use them. They're in the attic. But they all came with stands that connected. They were like hexagon shaped. They connected and they would either be grass or stone or dirt. And I loved that because whenever I wanted to set up like a diorama, I would use them depending on that. And that just and this has always been in my mind when I see like action figures, especially like GI Joe, Star. It's like there could be a game with these action figures, especially if
Yes.
people are collecting them. And so it's weird how I have always missed this miniature skirmish sort of game universe, but I'm halfway there with the action figure part and wanting the story. So having like the stands and it's like they could have crossed that stuff over early on.
Oh yeah.
Like Star. And you know what? I think there was a line of Star Wars figures actually that came with die, and you would be able to do something with it, but I never did it. And it had cards with stats on it,
Yeah.
but never. It might have been like very simple to where it never took off.
And I think that that's kind of the fine line that you have to balance is, you want the game to be as accessible to where someone who's just buying the figure for the figure might still play, but
Hmm.
you still want it to be a rich enough and deep and complex game that, hardcore players are going to want to foster and continue that community, right?
Yeah, and I think we're almost kind of talking about that with the Toys to Life, the video game thing. Like you have to take the video game aspect and the miniature aspect, but they both have to be good. You can't skimp on one for the other to
Yeah,
really get the full fan base in. Yeah.
exactly. No, it's got to be all or nothing. You can't use one to prop the other up. I think
Yeah.
is the ideal. But yeah, I mean, so obviously I'm a big tabletop guy, and one of the things that I enjoy that tabletop has brought to video games is that element of unpredictability. I'm like
Hmm.
fumbling over my words today. That element of unpredictability that comes from probability and chance. And there are a lot of video games out there. I encourage everybody to drop in the chat what your favorite video games are that incorporate some form of random number generation or random outcome generation. Obviously, when we talk about random generation, one of the first things that comes to mind is procedurally generated games, such
Yeah.
as, Spelunky or other types of roguelikes where, you generate the level at game time and you have like a unique environment to explore every time you boot up the game, right?
Yeah, I put so much time into Spelunky. I just seeing that I can hear the soundtrack and the special or the sound effects that's going on. Great game, and it's funny because like there's a lot of these games that to me they're the same genre even though they have their differences.
True.
The most recent one that I think nailed it to where I played a ton of it was Dead Souls. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, I hope I'm saying that right. Dead Cells, or is it Dead? No, it's Dead Cells.
Dead Cells? Okay.
Dead Cells. Yeah, it's a side scroller. It was a Kickstarter, and now it's a full release. But it has an awesome combat system,
Nice.
and but it's just that same type of roguelite where you die, you have to start over, but then you're slowly unlocking stuff. There was actually one that came out a long time ago called Super House of the Dead Ninjas. Now, that sounds like a crazy name,
Yeah.
but it was actually a really well-made game. I want to say this had to have been late 2000s, like maybe 2009, 2010. And that was just a great, random levels every time you played. Um,
Which is
yeah,
awesome. I think that that's a,
yeah,
a, a great way to introduce novelty into the game and to introduce replayability into the game, right?
yeah. Hmm.
Um,
Especially if it's a smaller scale game. If someone wants to, like, the way you can create the randomness really makes a game seem bigger than it is. And that's okay because there's systems in place that are fun to play with at a random level. Yeah.
yeah, agreed. I think that that is probably the best macro use of random number generation that you see in a lot of games. You'll see like hit percentages, things like XCOM,
Oh, yeah.
Morrowind. If you ever played the Knights of the Old Republic's game, those ones, you know, every hit percentage, like, you could either hit or miss based on your character stats and stuff like that. Sometimes that can be a little frustrating because, for instance, with Morrowind, if you didn't dump any points into your archery skill, you could be standing point blank and
Oh,
swinging
yeah.
off arrows and not hitting. And so that's probably a poor example of taking tabletop rules and then applying them to video game mechanics is hit percentages, which, you know, on the one hand, it's a direct translation, but on the other, it ignores the uniqueness of what video games have to offer because you can't
Well,
aim in a tabletop, right?
right. Yeah, so that's the interesting thing here because when it comes to video games and tabletop, etc., like early on in gaming and still today, I'm not into RPGs. Like a lot of it has to do with its turn-based action based on stats. And for me, it's like, well, my mind doesn't have to think fast. And that might not be true for all, but I like the real-time mechanics, the real-time combat. So there's been so that's like I think early on, I think maybe video games right away, in fact, may have started taking from tabletops just in the terms of stats.
Yeah.
Using stats to determine what happens next. And as games evolved and got more advanced, they started integrating more of the real-time combat systems, but with stats on top of it, so that something that you do could be random. I remember it was Fallout, and I didn't play this one or any of those, but the first person where you can either shoot in real time or choose to like pause and then aim at certain things.
Yeah.
Like to me, it's ridiculous. It seems, and again, I haven't experienced it. It seems ridiculous if there's an option of one or the other. I would rather be shooting real time and trying to aim. The idea to like when I first played Knights of the Old Republic, and I came across the first combat scenario, I was like, "What is this?"
And
But
they kind of throw you in on the deep end with the Knights of the Old Republic because it's like they don't tell you exactly what the combat's going to be like. And so you go in,
yeah,
start mashing buttons, and you're like, what is happening? And it's kind of a hybrid between real time. It's like a 1.5
yeah,
time because everything is still turn based, but it's all
yeah.
happening live. So if you forget to input your action for the turn, then you just miss a turn.
Yeah, and I could be jumping ahead, let me know. But
Sure.
the other flip side of that is the miniature tabletop games taking their battle systems and translating it to real time. So I think the best example are the Dawn of War games.
Okay.
It,
Yeah.
Dawn of War, 40,000 Dawn of War was the first game I played where I learned that something existed called Warhammer 40,000. Because after playing that game, I thought it was incredible. I saw that there's all these miniatures, and then I saw the game. I'm like, well, that's interesting. That's not, I guess I'm glad that they have this real-time strategy game that scratches the itch of wanting to real-time command things on the fly.
Yeah.
Um, and it's interesting because there's multiple areas I think where the tabletops translate into video games.
Yeah.
That's one where it's like a direct. Here's the universe now in real time. The other is when I think it's Red Alert, because Red Alert had it where when you wanted to just do a skirmish against a computer, you can actually have it randomly generate a map.
Which
Because
is
what was
awesome because
yeah,
that marries both the random number generation in the game and then also the
yeah,
random number generation of the probability of like hit percentages and damages and things like that.
yeah, because the thing that I've always loved about Command and Conquer games over StarCraft is the maps were asymmetrical.
Yep.
So when you would play a map, you never really knew what advantage or disadvantage you or the enemy had. And you had to explore the map and kind of see where other things are at. So when I would then play Red Alert, and it would randomly generate a map where hills would be randomly placed, resources would be randomly placed. That made that map so much more fun to play
Right.
because it was like a newer experience every time. It wasn't just one map that I memorized, what to do. So I'm bringing that up because I think there's so many elements of tabletop games that seem to be translated over to video games, but it seems to be if they're strategy based games or RPGs or action
Exactly.
RPGs.
Yeah, I think that obviously you kind of want the best of both worlds. You don't want to take
Mhm.
you don't want like a direct translation of a tabletop game because you're going to end up kind of lacking the experience of sitting at a table and kind of experiencing that live.
Yeah,
Obviously one big example, like the main example I would say of bringing a board game to a video game would be Mario Party and that whole series of
oh,
like
yeah.
you're basically playing a board game but in a video game format. But they
Yes.
do something unique that brings in that video game aspect, and that is the mini games, which, I take you as a person that probably enjoyed the mini game portion of Mario Party more than the board game portion.
Yeah, you know what? This is a good thing you brought up because it's almost like Mario Party is really just board games made as video games, but aren't tabletop games just more advanced board games? So
It's
there is
it's
that
it's it's
connective
like a
tissue there.
little vicious cycle that we create.
And so the aspect of the randomness of where you're going to land is something that universally, I guess, I'm fine with because of just playing random board games when I was younger.
Yeah,
But the mini game component is fun. That's when then it gets into the video game aspect.
right. Your
Yeah.
skill at the video game becomes more important, and you don't
Yeah.
feel as cheated.
Yeah. And I was going to bring up yeah, Prairie Tan was talking about Blood Bowl. And so that's something I've heard about a lot, but I've never played.
I've not heard of
And
that. What is that?
I think from what I remember, it looks like orcs and dwarves, but it's football
Oh, that's
or it's
awesome.
a sport. Yeah. And I've always seen like the Blood Bowl games, but I know they use tabletop mechanics. And that's why I've never played it, but I've always seen it. Um, but okay, so you've never heard of it then?
No, that's a new to me. So,
Oh, yeah. Well, you'll have to look that up. Oh, hey, Ian, good to see you
hey,
in
cheers,
there.
bud. And hey,
But
sure,
back to
dude. Good to see you as well over there on Twitch.
yeah, but back to Mario Party.
No. I mean, I think that you nailed it on the head. It's like, hey,
Oh,
it it has that board game element that we're familiar with, but it doesn't rely 100% on tabletop rules where you
yeah,
feel like you're out of control. And like you said, in games like Red Alert where you've got, your resources might spawn close to you or they might spawn far from you. That introduces that level of skill where it's like, okay, now I have to show that I'm good at the video game aspect of this in order to make the best out of the random generation that just, you know,
yeah.
you got to make the best of the cards you're dealt, like literally speaking.
You know, another good example is a more recent game on PS5, Returnal.
Yes,
Um,
yes, you and I were talking about
Excellent.
that earlier.
Yeah, one of the best games is just so hard. It's a third person shooter. Because it's really about shooting. It reminds me of a bullet hell shmup because that's how you have to think because the bullets are coming at you in patterns and you have to avoid them. But it plays like a typical shooter with the mechanics.
Interesting.
But every time you spawn into a door, or yeah, you go into a door to a new area, and sometimes they're big, sometimes they're small. It's completely different. You never come across the same area because there's so much loot you can get during your run and how to get it. Um, and it's interesting though with Returnal. I'll have to get back to it because it was one of those games where when you died, you have to start over.
Yep.
But it was so hard that even with all the hours I put into it, I never made it like halfway through the game. But they've since changed it where there's now a save system. So like if you have to stop playing, you can save.
I
Yeah.
mean, that while I understand the necessity for that, it does to me feel a little bit like cheating because, you're kind of interrupting one of the core mechanics of the game, which is that you kind of have to experience it live, and then of course the next time you boot it up, you want it to be random again. You don't want to.
Well, luckily they make it where you can only access the save once.
Oh, okay, that's an
Yeah,
interesting
yeah,
caveat.
yeah, exactly. So it's almost more like a modern day. Oh, I have to get to something
Yeah.
that's more important. So
What's
you
more
can
important than video games?
yeah. So you can essentially just have a save state that you can go back to. But once you load it, that's it. You can't load that save state again.
Okay. Cool.
And which I think is helpful because there's times where I would be doing a run that is lasting forever, and I'm not really progressing because you have to meet certain requirements to progress.
Yeah.
And oh, man, it's a good game. I would say it's harder than a Souls game.
I'm glad you brought up Souls games because those have like, it's that same sort of repetition where, you die, have to come back and go back to the
Yeah,
spot that you were working at. I think that you know, to add an extra layer of difficulty on top of that, again, anyone that's been following my channel, been following my work, you know that my sort of passion project that I've been working on in the meantime is sort of a dungeon crawler third person action game um that takes the sort of core mechanics that make like a Legend of Zelda dungeon fun and exciting, but applying them in a procedurally generated way so that every time you play that dungeon, you're experiencing it for the first time, essentially. Um,
Yeah, and you know what? That is a good idea when you said it in the context of like Zelda, because Zelda could benefit from some sort of in between major releases, some sort of just action-based game where you're just dungeon running. It doesn't really have to do with the story.
yeah,
I want to say they might have done that with Four Swords back on the GameCube, and I think there's a GBA version.
I didn't play Four
But
Swords, but I did like the sort of
yeah,
mechanic behind it where you kind of the multiplication and
yeah, yeah. So, but with Dark Souls, there's also tabletop elements to that too because of how you're making a character.
that's true.
And it's almost like the tabletop elements are just as imaginative as they are in a tabletop game, because the Souls really lacks narrative and context, and so you're almost having to create your own by the character you decide to do. Yeah, from the point of creating your character, you're already creating your story. And then as you're playing, depending on what items you pick up and use, and then what you read from the descriptions, you're then creating still, again, your own story, because you'll miss half the stuff and half the lore and only get lore based on what you're coming across.
Yeah,
So, in a way, that's another tabletop experience in a video game. Um,
yeah,
in a way, it's forcing the player to do it based on the lack of mechanics in the game in terms of like the narrative is not there, so you have to create it, etc.
yeah. I see what you're saying, and I think that
Yeah.
that kind of that's an interesting way to introduce variety into the game is by if you're not going to, as the developer, introduce an element of randomness or an element of variety in the whether it's the narrative structure, whether it's procedurally generated levels, whether there's some kind of random number generation when it comes to like what types of enemies you face and stuff like that. The ultimate random number generation is the player itself.
Yeah.
Because the player, especially in a game where you create a character and you have these unique builds and things like that, that's the ultimate X factor. That's the ultimate fly in the works, monkey wrench in the ointment, whatever cliche you want to go with, is the player is always going to introduce an element of randomness into the game that you're developing as much as you try to control that, right?
And that's a good point, because there's some ways that is controlled. In a way, Breath of the Wild is introducing random mechanics that there is some control over because it has to do with the physics.
Yeah.
You never know maybe how the outcome. I've blown myself up many times not realizing how the physics were going to be involved, but that could change the outcome of a skirmish.
Well, and that's the whole sort of, I guess, culture behind speedrunning is I'm going to
Mm.
exploit the mechanics of the game in a way that the developer didn't intend in order to advance the game in a way that does not conform to the way the game is supposed to be played. Air quotes.
And and if you were to do that in tabletop, the game master would probably just say, no, that's not possible.
Right, like in a tabletop RPG,
Yeah.
obviously, Dungeons and Dragons, you really don't have any control over that. I mean, it hasn't come out yet, but we are still recording the podcast over on RiverQuest Games for a homebrew Dungeons and Dragons campaign that is going to be airing the first week of August. So keep an eye out
Oh,
for
sweet.
that over on the RiverQuest Games YouTube channel. And of course, it's going to be available on wherever you listen to your podcasts. But there was a character that it was the player who was starting to get bored with the lack of action that we were experiencing, and he straight up says, okay, I'm gonna grab the next person that I see walking on the street, I'm gonna throw him into the fountain that we've just walked past and start wailing on him. And we're all sitting there like, what are you doing? Are you out of your
That's
mind?
interesting. It's almost like reflecting real life when people get bored because they don't have things to do, and then they they take to like violence to
Yeah,
let out their boredom.
pretty much. Well, it reminds me of that meme that's like, you know, when you're an NPC in Skyrim and you see the player quick saving and you're like,
Yeah.
because you
Yeah.
know that like, oh, the quick save is the I'm about to go and F shit up so that I can
F everything up.
have some
Yep.
fun because I'm bored.
Although
Um,
that's the interesting variable with me is because I don't like to hurt innocent NPCs, even if it has no effect on the gameplay. There is something,
it's deeply.
this goody-goodiness that I've grown up with that has stuck with me. I can't.
I only do it
Yeah.
when they're rude to me.
Yeah. There you
There's
go.
no reason for an artificial intelligence to be rude to me. Um,
I remember when I played Oblivion. That's the only one I've really even tried.
yeah.
And it was the very beginning, and a guy was either getting me out of a prison or something, and I accidentally hit him trying to get out the door, and he got mad at me and started attacking me. And I was like, okay, I'm not playing this game anymore. But that is a pretty random instance that might not happen.
Yeah.
That's it's like, then does that make you a bad guy the rest of the time? I actually don't know because I didn't finish it, but um,
um, so Elden Ring is the journey to get maidens, apparently. Yes, that is true. The
oh, oh yeah, that is a good
that
one.
is
I
a good
saw
one.
that. But another one is from Ian with the Tiny Tina's Wonderland. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, so that's the Dungeons and Dragons game from Borderlands, right?
Yeah, which from what I've heard, it's really just Borderlands. It just has a little bit of the aesthetic of being in a tabletop world.
Okay. Well, I mean that's still
Yeah,
cool. I think it's a
yeah.
unique twist on the Borderlands meta, if you will.
Oh, and seeing that shirt dude talk about Terraria reminds me, yeah, Terraria, Minecraft, these have some really cool elements. Like literally in Minecraft, you could just load up a server with a bunch of people and literally have a tabletop game right there.
Yeah.
Because there's just so much that you could do, especially if the game master's like, okay, I'm going to go in creative mode and I'm going to put these items here. And then this is what you guys need to do. Like that is, I don't, and I wonder if that actually takes place. I've just never seen that before.
I mean you just gave me an idea.
Okay.
No.
Because that's a way, it's almost like having your tabletop and all your gear, but in Minecraft, you can just summon it when you need to, turn it back to survival,
Yep.
have the players try to get through and then go back to creative. Yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah. Because and I'm sorry, I keep talking about it. One time I loaded up a map of Minecraft and I was surprised because I was on a small island where I could see the ocean around me. But when I looked out in the distance, I saw like a snow castle. I saw a volcano, well, not snow castle, snow mountain, a volcano. I saw like different biomes around me. I'm like, wait a minute, this should be like starting an adventure,
Yeah.
and then I can choose what direction I want to go into. And I kind of wish they went that far with Minecraft, but they never did. But you can explore Minecraft
You
on your own,
can.
find the Ender Realm, kill the Ender Dragon. But
Yeah, I mean
yeah,
there's an element of exploration to Minecraft that obviously it speaks to something deep in people's desire for a novel experience.
yeah,
And that's ultimately what everyone craves from a video game is a novel experience. Um obviously some people find comfort in playing the same game over again because they can beat it quickly or they know the twist
oh yeah,
that's coming ahead. But one of the jokes that my brothers and I always have is we used to play like story based games together, and when one of us would go to bed for the night, it's like, all right, everyone shut it down, like I don't want to miss the story that's coming, if, whether it's Uncharted 1, and we're like, I
yeah,
don't want to miss the element of the story, so everyone has to shut it down so that we can all experience it together. It's like watching a movie, and then once you played through that story once, the novelty's gone. And so
yeah.
the random generation and procedural, generation methods that have been applied to video games, I want to try and bring that into not necessarily story, because obviously with story you do have the ability to do some sort of random generation. You can randomly generate NPCs. You can have quests that maybe randomly generate. You can even have like the player introduces random results, and hopefully you can manage those results. Like, if you decide to save this town from a bunch of orcs, then the town stays human. If you don't decide to save that town from from an orc pillaging, then, obviously that village isn't going to be there anymore. And so then, it becomes incumbent on the game to load that random seed every time that the player loads up the game. But yeah, what I would like to do is kind of create a unique experience every time the player logs in and goes to play a game. And, what does that look like, right?
Yeah, and that's a good point you brought up with story, because sometimes a story would be the ultimate way if you could add those elements. So Rogue Legacy does it where when you start the run, your character story wise has something with them that's different than their others. It's like your ancestor. Some might have like some sort of double jump. I think one of them is like slower. Like there's different attributes, that story reason that your character has. Now, and that affects the gameplay, but does it really affect the story? Now, one thing that I'll always use this. I don't think any game has beaten this concept I'm about to share, and I might have shared it before. It's Siphon Filter Omega Strain on PS2. The online portion
Love
had a
Siphon
co-op.
Filter.
Okay, the online portion had a co-op where there was multiple objectives in a mission, and sometimes you had to split up. Like you had to split up to complete them, but sometimes you might not fully complete one, and then there would be an alternate objective. One that I loved was, I think, was it an ambulance might have crashed into a building early in the game. You have to get a laptop hard drive in the building, but the sprinklers went on because it caused a fire when there was the crash. So there's different options to get to the hard drive. One of them is have one player run to the water pipes and shut them off. Then you can go in and get the hard drive. But the water might destroy the hard drive, and then you have to find another way to get that data. So
Interesting.
games don't do this anymore, where they have these complex multi-objective missions that you have to split up and then complete them. And in some games almost do that, like the new Evil Dead. The problem is, if you split up, you're most likely going to die. They kind of make it where they want you to stick together. But I mean, in tabletop games, I guess it could be the same way, right? There's an objective. The player tries. They say, "Okay, I'm going to do this," but the game master could say, "Oh, that didn't work." What are you going to do now? And another player could then kind of come in and be like, "Oh, I'll do this." That's like a cooperative, maybe, scenario.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that having a dungeon master there as sort of a referee to step in and say, like, okay, now that we've introduced this element of randomness to the game, I'm here to reel it back in.
Mm.
And even the most sophisticated algorithms in the world can only do so much, right? You're going to have a limited supply of outcomes to choose from. So I think that, what from a technical standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
the best kind of way to approach that would be through sort of a systemic gaming construct, which I think you brought it up most eloquently with Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild being a physics, the physics system in that game, and you have these are the tools you have, right? You have like the magnetic powers, you have the ice powers, you have your Sheikah slate that does all these different things. This is your sort of sandbox that you can play in. You
Yeah.
can't do anything, but you can do a lot of things. And we have
Yeah.
outcomes programmed for each of those many things that you can do, right?
And I feel like in gaming, because that adds that element of randomness, but it's fun because you get players experimenting, which is a form of gaming. Um, I feel like right now games, they just add open world because that's what everyone likes. I thought by now, because this started back with Half-Life 2, I
Mm-hmm.
thought games would just all have physics-based environments that by now, if I'm playing Elden Ring, I can knock down like boulders that are just sitting around if I have the right equipment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or I could cut down any tree. So if I'm like battling a bunch of guys in the forest, I could like have some trees fall on them or something. Like I felt like by now that would just be a standard in any game.
And I
Um,
think we're kind of
y-
spoiled by that because, to be
yeah.
honest with you, you know, when I sit down and play video games with my wife sometimes, she's kind of her first Zelda game was Breath of the Wild. And so when we went back and played Skyward Sword, she's like, "Well, why can't I climb
Uh,
this wall?"
yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there's no reason. I think there's a Resident Evil speedrunner called Bakba Soup. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was telling a
Mm,
story about his mom watching him speed run like Resident Evil 3, like the classic PS1 version.
mhm.
And his mom says to him, like, "Well, if you're trying to run away from those zombies, why don't you just grab that bike and ride away?" And he's like, "That's not
Uh,
how, like, that's a pre-rendered background. Like, there's no, that the bike doesn't exist. It's just
yeah,
it's
and that's
scenery."
I think that's what we want out of games ultimately. And another reason I thought we were going that way and it almost happened was Bad Company, Battlefield Bad Company.
Yeah.
That had amazing multiplayer. I don't know if it was Bad Company 2 or maybe there's not a 2. For some reason I'm thinking 2, but it just had the destructible environments like the any building. And I don't know why games haven't fully gone in that direction because I really feel like after that point just personally, I haven't really found multiplayer FPSs that I'm like, oh, this is an awesome game. Can't wait to play it. It's like, oh, cool, the new Call of Duty. I'll play it for a couple months. Oh, the new Halo. Oh, I'll play. Oh, it didn't turn out as good. Yeah, that's been happening with 343. Oh, the new hero shooter. Fun for a couple months. There's not a game that I think was pushing the envelope like Bad Company was. And apparently, the rumor is they're working on another Bad Company, like a remake, and it's really only going to work if they focus on that physics system. And I
Yeah.
I think more games. I mean, again, I was using Elden Ring as an example to have a full-on physics system, to have the randomness occur. First person, think of online competitive first-person shooters. That randomness is a part of it, whereas usually the online FPS community, they're so tight in the gameplay mechanics, they know what they're doing. But think of if buildings could fall and there's multiple physics points of maybe like a beam where you never know how the building is going to
I
collapse,
mean,
etc.
that's Fortnite, right? It's like, oh, I got to make sure that I drop at the
Yes.
towers because I memorized the map. And even GBO2, like, you introduce the random
Yeah.
element of PvP, which in itself is its own sort of randomness because you can't predict
Yeah.
what the opponent is going to do, but you can memorize the maps.
It's funny you brought up Fortnite because they created a new mode that doesn't have building. And maybe this is a off-topic tangent, but like with the building in Fortnite, it's a neat concept, but what it does is it makes the players then for a long time build up around themselves, and then it's like a stalemate for a while.
Yep.
And some people might like that, but to me, that prolongs the game. And I got to a point where I was playing with my son quite a bit where I was taking out the builders. I wouldn't build. And I just learned like if you start destroying the bottom of their structures as they're building, they'll have no choice but to like go run and hide behind a tree.
Yep.
Um, and it's almost like instead of being random, it almost made it predictable. If someone's building versus not building, you can predict how to take them out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's once you have memorized how people can respond to given situations,
Mhm.
then you have a tactic to overcome that. Um,
Whereas if there was a structure that blew up in so many different ways because of the particles slash physics, like you don't know how the player's going to react. It's like, I know I'm going to blow up this building,
yeah,
but is that going to give them more cover? Or is that going to hurt me? Is a piece going to come flying and hit me? And I really want more of that.
yeah, larger systemic gaming
Yeah.
with dynamic physics, I think is definitely the way to go. Um,
Yeah.
so let's see. There is Battlefield Bad Company 2 that I love. Ian says, Bulbathulu, thanks for joining. Hope you have a good night. So hope you get rested up.
Oh, yeah.
That shirt dude says, on the topic of RNG, what do you think of characters like Guilty Gear Strive's Faust? I've never played Guilty Gear. Have you?
Yes, and I'm familiar with that character. Is the randomness having to do with his move set? I didn't use that character too much because his move set was pretty crazy. Like in 2D fighting games, I can't. There's this disconnect if a character's moves are more of wacky animations and not necessarily like their fist or their like. I have trouble with that. And I remember, I think it was that character. He was really wacky. Um,
Yeah.
I think he had a bag over his head too. If that sounds
Kind of
familiar.
wild.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
Um,
Um,
let's see. The Oot Stampede begins tomorrow. May or may not be available. Oh yes, it is your 1 year podcast anniversary, Adam. Tomorrow.
oh,
So
that's right. I
congratulations
know.
on that.
I know. That's
Um,
crazy.
but yeah, so you and I have been talking about the topic of tabletop mechanics and RNG
Mm,
in video games. And on that subject, we've got some big announcements with G Generation Eternal, the new Gundam game that's kind of coming out on mobile.
yeah.
I'm a big fan of G Generation series. Obviously, this
Hmm.
has a strong tabletop vibe to it. This is basically taking your miniature skirmish game and putting it on your mobile phone, right?
Yeah. You know what? I love the series too. I just got into it. In fact, even though I complain about turn-based games, I've always been into Shining Force, Fire Emblem. I feel like they're two different types of strategy games. One's more focused on like a long-term plan. The other's more on quick battles. And this SD Generation series, even though I don't like SD styled Gundams, I love the fast paced nature it has,
Yeah.
the options for attack. I almost feel like I'm playing in real time, only because every move I'm gonna die. Like I'm like, oh my gosh, like I have to really think about my moves or something's gonna be taken out here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
Facts. I mean, it's an awesome application of that sort of style of tabletop miniature skirmish game. Um but I think that, like you said, this might be too direct of a translation, and it does lack some of that randomness that you would expect from a game.
oh yeah.
I mean,
Except for like the mist. But it's weird. Like sometimes you can look at the stats to see what are the chances, or you can choose to try to evade. So maybe some of that's thrown in, but sometimes the scenarios will make it where if you have a certain type of character, a smaller enemy is always going to miss you.
yep.
Or if you have a certain type of character, no matter what, you're always going to hit, and then you'll know, and you can. But sometimes you don't know if the mobile suits are kind of neck and neck with each other in terms of their fighting power. You never know what's going to happen. And shout out to Rogue New Type real quick. I just saw
Oh,
you in the
hey,
chat.
cheers, bud. Good to see you. And have a good night, shirt dude.
Oh yeah.
If you haven't checked out that shirt dude, he runs an awesome channel over on Twitch and on Odyssey. He covers a lot of the Gundam Versus series. Like I said, he treats them like
Mm.
fighting games, which is a pretty cool way of looking at them. I
Yeah.
always considered them like arcade shooters. But yeah, I think that introducing a way that prevents players from metagaming, because like you said, once you've played a scenario in one of the G Generation
Yeah.
games, you know how to beat it. And it's like, well, I know
Yeah,
I'm
that's
just gonna
true.
drop in my Unicorn Gundam and I'm gonna mop the floor with all these balls. Like,
Well, that's funny because yeah, there's a time where you can go back to a map and then you know what moves specifically to do and then you can clear it.
yep,
Now, does that ever translate back into a tabletop format, or is again where the game master can kind of like want they will purposely change things up so it's not just a vanilla run.
well, so I mean, obviously, like in a tabletop RPG, game master can always switch something up. And sometimes, as a game master myself, I've set up scenarios where it's like, okay, you took out all of the werewolves that I had planned for you to fight, but here come two more. Kind of like you
Yeah,
just pulling stuff out of
that's
your
cool.
butt, basically. But I think
But
that even
typical
oh, go ahead.
skirmish style tabletop gaming or like the hero one,
Oh,
is that where there's not a game master? It's just these are the rules and you go for it. And
exactly.
can you then get so familiar with the game that you can do like a solid run,
No,
or is there enough
I
randomness?
I would say that, well, because that's kind of PvP. And there are certain scenarios you can play where you have victory conditions where it's like, You
Oh,
have to
okay.
take out this stronghold within 15
Oh, that's
turns. One player has to
oh,
defend the stronghold, the other player has to attack them. And of course, it's like 2 to 6 players, so you could have like, you know, different factions on the map kind of playing against each other. And then, of course, everyone uses different squads. You can assemble different units that do different things. Some are ranged specialists, some are, area of effect control kind of things. So, I mean, that is a pretty good way of introducing a lot of randomness into a scenario. Is like not only can
yeah.
not only is the map randomly generated, technically, I mean, obviously, you have a hand in that, but you can't control what team your opponent is going to pick, and you can't
Yeah.
control the victory conditions. So you've got
Okay.
some randomness in that, and there are some even some board games. There's a board game that I backed on Kickstarter called Wild, and that makes use of an AI deck. So you have a deck of cards that when
Wow.
you shuffle the cards, overturn it, and it tells you what the enemies are going to do on a given turn.
That's yeah, so that's pretty neat. That's a cool a layer to add in.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, very cool. So before we sign off, because I think we are a little bit over time here. Sorry to hold you on so long, but
Oh no.
before we sign off, I did want to share something that you and I have kind of privately been working on, which I think is going to take some of those tabletop skirmish elements that we've been talking about and not only
Yeah.
apply them in the micro sort of kill team, 40K style, but also the sort of grand strategy, Gieran's Greed type uh video game. And so let's see what I've got here. I'm showcasing a little bit of the gameplay of what what a Gundam RTS may or may not look
Mm.
like if, you know, maybe a YouTuber pair were to throw one together. Just hypothetically speaking, for the sake of argument.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there would just have to be some specific elements you need. One is the mobile suits to look like mobile suits, which obviously they did. It's funny. There is a Gundam RTS game out there. I'll have to show it to you. It's just an executable where you just have a big open world. You do whatever you want. You can just build whatever you want. I've never really fully grasped how to utilize it, but
So it's got like kind of that Minecrafty vibe where it's a little bit more like a crafting.
I don't know because I had trouble getting through it. I started getting attacked, and I'm like, I don't even know my tech tree. It's very bare bones and it looks kind of basic, but someone was just trying to make a Gundam RTS because it has to happen.
Yeah,
Now I know the Vita had a real time Gundam game that was released in Japan. I just never played it. I don't know if you'd ever
not I.
played it.
No.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
and I'm sure that it's decent, but you would expect like if it were that great of a game, you would have as rabid of a fan base as like say Zionic Front, which is
Yeah.
basically like
Uh,
Rainbow Six but with Gundams, right?
yeah, and Spanking Goose 80. Okay, just want to make sure I got that. A base to research and build your units. And yes, I love base building in RTSs. I love in an RTS that there's other elements I have to take care of. So, something I would always want to have in a Gundam RTS is the base building.
Yeah,
It's
resource
the forward
management.
operating base. Yes, and then having to then build out your base, go get the resources, build mobile suits. Yeah. Just call me Goose.
Just don't die in the end.
Yeah.
Um, well, cool. Yeah, like I said, I just wanted to show that off because it was a little bit of a fun, you know,
Yeah.
mini project that we threw together. But I think that this has been a good discussion about, introducing random gameplay and mechanics into video games, and what, because obviously you have procedural generation and then you have random outcomes, and both of them can be used to introduce novelty into the experience that the player is enjoying.
Yeah.
And I think that nowadays, like you mentioned, the bare minimum that we expect is physics interaction.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I I hate it when I'm walking into a blade of grass that happens to be gigantic and it's like right in front of my gun is clipping into it and the wall in front of me at the same time. It's like it takes you out, of the experience.
Yeah, yeah. You want that kind of immersion where at least things behave as you expect them to.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, Goose brought up Halo Wars. The Halo Wars games are amazing RTSs.
I've
Like,
heard the same.
it's weird because I love Command and Conquer and StarCraft, and no company and Company Heroes, Dawn of War, Relic did a good job there, but there was nothing until Halo Wars. Halo Wars 2 is so good. It's exactly the type of RTS I like, except that they are curated and crafted maps, symmetrical maps. That I hate because
Yeah,
I feel like
it's too predictable.
there's less. Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
you kind of have your tactics already prepared before you start the map.
Yep. Like, where the choke points are, so I'm going to go run over there and put my defenses up. And it's like I'd rather be able to have to find a choke point or not have one and be like, okay, what do I do?
Right.
Yeah.
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 Introduce that element of unpredictability.
Yep.
Sweet. Well, did you
Cool.
have anything that you wanted to touch on before we sign off for the evening?
No, I think that's good. This was a good talk, man. Always good to talk gaming and to learn more about tabletop and how I know more about it than I realized just through gaming because of what gaming over the years has picked up from the tabletop experience.
And like you said, it's a back and forth thing, you know. Tabletop introduces RNG to video games, and then you get games like Resident Evil that become tabletop games.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's
it's
it's a circle of life, man.
yeah.
It's like with movies, except those always turn out bad. The video game movies, and then back to maybe like remember there was a Street Fighter movie, the game. It's like why?
Well, I mean, yeah, I want to play as Raul Julia, but
Yeah.
well, good deal. Well, for those of you who don't know, over on the Gundam Explained or the Gundam Explained channel tomorrow, we've got the Gundam Explained podcast, 8:30
Yep.
p.m. Eastern Time, 7:30 Central. Do tune in for that. We've got some fun stuff to talk about over there. And
Yep.
again, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I've got some new stuff coming out with some little products that I might make available to you. And
Oh, that's
you
cool.
know, continue to support the work that Adam and I do, because we are gonna hopefully bring you some stuff that is enjoyable to play and, you know, add to your shelf at the very least.
Yeah, I cannot wait to finish getting my 3D printer set up and get those STLs from your Patreon because
Oh yeah.
when I love to sit here, like I was saying, I like to just paint little details for fun, and I'm gonna be doing that all day.
Yeah, I did the dry brushing on my Gundam miniature here to start off. And maybe,
It's
maybe
not
I'll live
focusing too
stream the
well.
painting process. If you guys are
Yes,
interested, I will
that'd
stream
be
that
cool.
along with you guys so you can judge me on how poor my brushstroke skills are.
Or learn techniques. Come on.
Or learn.
Come on.
Good deal. Well, hey, Adam, thank you as always for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Chat, thank you for keeping it lively. Goose, Robert, Rogue, have a good rest of your evening. Have a good rest of your week. Hope you guys have a good one and catch up with
Yeah.
us tomorrow. Cheers.
See y'all later.